So you won't be coming for the final. You got knocked out, right? A shock, I know. The back four. Oh no, I'm sorry, Mr. Keegan. I'm afraid the deposit is non-refundable. Perhaps you could give Oldham a call. They might be able to reimburse you. Bye-bye.
A little hope can go a long way. The FA Cup fourth round, Southampton v Portsmouth, Man U v Middlesbrough, Oldham v Bolton. Live this weekend on BBC One and Radio 5 Live. Great drama from the BBC.
Everybody has an opinion about Robert Kilroy Silk. But maybe they're wrong.
Would I want to spoil everybody's myths and perceptions about me?
Then again, he's not really making many friends.
They are a gaggle of rejects, failures, has-beens, no-marks, liars, dodgy characters.
Make up your own mind about one of England's most outspoken politicians. Kilroy, Behind the Tan, Monday at 9 on BBC Three.
Newsnight now on BBC Two with Kirsty Walk.
Tonight, 60 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, people all over the world join with survivors of the death camp to remember the millions killed by the Nazis. Also, the remarkable legacy of one victim whose last novel about French collaboration, only published now, is rocking France. We speak to Nathan Sharansky, the former Soviet dissident and Israeli politician whose book on ending tyranny is a White House favorite.
The world should really apply what Nathan Sharansky called the town square test.
Exit strategy? What exit strategy? The leader of the Liberal Democrats calls on Mr. Blair to announce a plan to get the troops out of Iraq.
We are taking cover.
And as Newsnight celebrates 25 years, how we dealt with momentous events. Good evening. It has been a day of remembrance for the millions who died as a result of Hitler's plan to exterminate the Jews. World leaders joined survivors and the relatives of the dead at Auschwitz, the scene of murder on an industrial scale. Here's David Sells.
Sur la rampe, toute proche d'ici, les hommes, les femmes,
and on the platform, men, women, children, brutally disembarked from the wagons, and they were selected in a millisecond with a gesture from the SS doctor, Joseph Mengele, and he decided upon people's right to live or to die.
C'est que je pleure encore chaque fois que je pense.
I still cry every time that I think of all these children, and I'll never be able to forget them.
Auschwitz today, the 60th anniversary of the camp's liberation by Soviet troops. Presidents, kings, queens and survivors gathered in the Polish snow to remember that Nazi slaughterhouse where more than 1 million human beings, mainly Jews, were eliminated as though they were pigs or poultry.
The Germans worked day and night to conduct a genocide industry, a killing factory for the murder of our people in Europe. It happened in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the capital of the Death Empire. It happened in Majdanek, Treblinka, Sobibor, Chlemno, Belzec, and many other sites of mass murder. When I step on the earth of the death camps, I am seized by a trembling fear, lest I tread on the ashes of the victims mixed in Europe's soil.
And in London, in Westminster Hall, Holocaust Memorial Day was commemorated by the Queen, the Prime Minister, and some 600 ageing survivors of the Nazi atrocities.
We must remember, above all, that the Holocaust did not start with a concentration camp. It started with a brick through the shop window of a Jewish business, the desecration of a synagogue, the shout of racist abuse on the street. So we recall today what humanity at its worst can do.
One of the victims of Auschwitz was Irene Nemirovsky, the celebrated Russian writer and a Jew. "I'm going on a long journey," she told her two young daughters in July 1942, before being arrested by the French police. By then, she had no illusions about French collaboration with the Nazis. 5 weeks later, she was dead at the age of 39. All she left behind for her two orphaned children was a suitcase containing what they thought was a diary. But now, more than 60 years later, her daughter, Denise Epstein, has finished deciphering her mother's tiny handwritten notes and has realized that it was her final novel, Suitcase Française, a chronicle of collaboration in an occupied village of Vichy, France. As our Paris correspondent Caroline Wyatt reports, the book has sparked both the literary resurrection of this long-forgotten author and soul-searching about the nation's conduct during war.
Et que pensent les Français, monsieur, de l'issue de la guerre?
And what do the French think about the war, monsieur? Asked Bonnet. The women looked at each other, scandalized. It simply wasn't done. One didn't talk to the Germans about the war, not about this one, nor indeed the last one, nor about Pétain, nor Merzel-Kébir, nor about the way France had been cut in two, nor about the occupying troops, or indeed about anything that mattered at all. In fact, there was only one possible approach, to affect a cold indifference, the very tone that Benoit used in reply as he lifted his glass, full to the brim with red wine. "They don't give a damn, monsieur."
Denise Epstein, reading from her mother's final novel, Suite Française. It's thanks to Denise that Irene Nemirovsky's voice, silenced at Auschwitz, can at last be heard again. A writer resurrected by her daughter's courage in saving her mother's last words. A voice all the more powerful for having long been forgotten. The novel itself is a portrait of occupied France, written by a Jewish novelist who wrote as she lived under the shadow of her own impending death. Yet in the Paris of the 1930s, Irene Nemirovsky seemed to have everything. The daughter of a wealthy Russian banker, she and the family settled here after they were forced to flee the Russian Revolution. In her mid-20s, Nemirovsky was already a celebrated author and the darling of café society.
Irene Nemirovsky, qui était très connue.
She was a kind of princess, a celebrity of French literature in the 1930s, who went to all the best places, who was a friend of Cocteau and a member of all the literary salons, who was in all the papers, who sold thousands of books, a queen of French literature.
Irene married a fellow Russian Jewish émigré, a banker, Michel Epstein. Their first child, Denise, was born in 1929, and then, a few years later, her younger sister, Elizabeth. At the family's apartment on the left bank, they enjoyed a life of immense privilege while their mother worked on her latest novel.
Elle travaillait énormément. Elle écrivait énormément.
She worked all the time, from morning to night. She worked so much. Her hands were always busy, writing. I can't say I have memories of her as a housewife. We had a nanny, a nurse, and a governess, but my mother was a very modest woman. She always dressed very simply. She didn't like jewels, and I don't remember her wearing any makeup. After she met my father, she dedicated herself to two things, the family and writing.
As Denise and her sister played outside in the parks, they were unaware their charmed life was about to end. The storm clouds of war were gathering, and anti-Jewish feeling was on the rise. In 1939, Irene had the whole family baptized into the Roman Catholic Church. perhaps hoping that one day it might save their lives.
When the war started and we spoke about Jews, Madame Nemirovsky said it wasn't possible that people would be exterminated. But my mother told her to go, to leave France, and her friends told her to go to the USA, but she wouldn't.
Instead, as the Germans closed in on Paris, Irene sent the children to their nanny's home in the Burgundy countryside, joining the tens of thousands of civilians fleeing the city. In 1940, Irene and her husband joined them in a village called Issy-l'Évêque. There they stayed at the Hôtel des Voyageurs, living side by side with the occupying German soldiers of the Wehrmacht.
Nous avions des relations courtoises.
With very cordial relations with the Germans. At the hotel, my father played billiards with the German officers. He was bored, and he was the only one in the village who could speak German, so he acted as a translator.
J'ai parlé allemand.
Et Madame Stein écrivait, c'est tout.
She often wrote in the dining room of the hotel while Denise was at school and Elizabeth was playing with the governess. Madame Nemirovsky didn't speak much, she just wrote. I never thought she would have such a sad end.
Je l'ai souvent fait avec Denise.
Marinette Lacombe, who still lives in the village, became friends with Denise and Elizabeth at school. She shows me the room that the family lived in at the hotel and takes me inside for coffee with their old classmates.
Madame Epstein, moi je trouvais que c'était une femme très élégante. Ouais. On voyait à Issy-l'Évêque qu'elle sortait de l'ordinaire par rapport aux gens du village. Mais très affable, gentille.
C'était une femme de la ville.
Every Sunday the family went to Mass in the local church, even though the new Vichy laws meant that the girls and their parents had to wear the yellow star that marked them out as Jews, whatever religion they practiced.
Un matin, à partir de maintenant, ma chérie.
One morning I was told, from now on, darling, you'll have to wear the star, and you'll have to make sure that you never take it off in public, and that it's always visible.
Qu'elle soit toujours visible.
Ils se sont inscrits eux-mêmes à la mairie, ils devaient se déclarer.
Everyone knew they were Jewish. Nobody denounced them. They had to register themselves at the town hall. They wore the yellow star, as all Jews had to wear the Star of David, without exception. But we never paid much attention to it. Everyone knew that the Germans were looking for Jews, and they were the only Jews in Issy-l'Évêque. It was a bad time.
Irene sensed that time was running out. Every day she walked in the woods, where she'd sit and write page after page in her notebook, trying desperately to finish her novel about life under occupation in a fictional village called Bussy, a place not unlike Issy-l'Évêque. When the family left the hotel to move into a house nearby, she wrote a will to ensure her daughters would be taken care of if she died. Not long after came a knock at the door.
Elle a été arrêtée le 13 juillet au matin.
My mother was arrested on the morning of the 13th of July 1942. I didn't know why the gendarmes came to the house, or why a teacher who lived nearby came to fetch me and hid me in her room, or why she brought me back to the house later, or why my mother had a little suitcase ready. There were no tears. I was told that mother was going on a journey. My parents went to their room, and the police didn't follow them. They let them stay on their own for a little while. It was a solemn farewell, even though we didn't know it was the last farewell. Then I saw her leave in the gendarme's car. After that, our lives became hell. In an instant, a happy family life was brutally torn apart. And in the village, no one said a word.
Aged just 13 and 5, the girls didn't know their mother had been taken to Auschwitz, nor that she died 5 weeks later. That October, their father Michel was also arrested at their home in Issy. He too perished in the camp. But he left one thing behind, a suitcase that belonged to Irene.
Je ne sais pas si c'est mon père, mais sûrement c'est lui.
I don't know if it was my father. It must have been. Who put the manuscript and the photos into the case. It was simply there at the house. So when we left, it was a reflex. It was my mother's, so I took it with us.
Nous avons fui.
The girls themselves escaped deportation after a German soldier took pity on them, but they were forced into hiding. At great risk to herself, their nurse ensured they survived, hiding the girls deep in the French countryside, in convents and in cellars. Through it all, Denise never let her mother's suitcase out of her sight. When the war finally ended, Denise and Elizabeth began a desperate search for their parents, coming here to the Hotel Lutetia, where survivors returning from the camps would gather. Day after day, the girls held up a placard bearing their parents' names, but their mother and father never came. For years, Denise refused to give up hope, all the time keeping safe the suitcase her mother had given her, in the hope that one day she could give it back.
Et donc ce manuscrit était toujours là.
The manuscript was always there. I opened the suitcase and closed it again and again. It was frightening. It was painful. I recognized the color of the ink my mother used, the blue of the seven seas, and the yellowing paper, still well preserved. And I found it all too painful. And at first, I didn't realize it was a novel, not at all. But then, as I tried to decipher it bit by bit, it became clear. And as I copied it, first on an old Remington typewriter, and later on a computer, I was always aware that this would be my legacy to my children. Nothing material, but a treasure that they could cherish. And that's why I kept it safe in a drawer.
And the completed manuscript might have stayed there, as it did for 60 years, had Denise not mentioned it to a friend, who was a writer and an admirer of Nemirovsky's work.
My friend Denise Epstein told me, you know, I just finished to copy the novel of my mother. The novel of your mother? You're sure? She told me, yes. I was believing that it was a diary, and in fact it is not. So I said to her, you have to publish it very soon.
Miriam rang me and told me the story about her meeting with Denise Epstein in this bookshop. And she said, well, it's an incredible story. Denise had this manuscript since 60 years in her home, and she kept the manuscript, and she did nothing with the manuscript, and you have to read it. So I called the day after. I called Denise Epstein. She sent me the manuscript. And when I read it, well, I think it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of literature, and it's a masterpiece of history.
He returned to the main road and found himself in the midst of the refugees' vehicles. They careered past at a furious pace. He saw a big grey convertible which had nearly run a small lorry into the ditch. Its driver had escaped without so much as slowing down for a second. He walked on, and the river of cars seemed to run faster and faster, like a roll of film unspooling. He saw a lorry full of soldiers. He made desperate signs. Without stopping, someone stretched out their hands and hoisted him up into the lorry, still camouflaged with greenery and twigs. I wanted to warn you, said Hubert, gasping for breath. I saw German soldiers in a forest not far from here. They're everywhere, lad, replied the soldier.
She saw the life in the small village with the German army staying occupying this village, and this shows the attitude of each person. And I think her love goes to the French peasants, because she shows the life for them is very hard, and some try to resist, and she shows that the bourgeois don't do anything, they collaborate to save the beautiful house, the beautiful dishes, the beautiful everything they have. So it's a very cruel book, very cruel.
It's a very important book because it's about a period that's very painful for France, a period that the French have never really overcome, that it was us, the French, collaborating actively with the Germans, that it was the French police who arrested Irène Nemirovsky and her husband, and it was the French police who were responsible for the death of 100,000 French Jews, many who came here to find refuge, but were arrested and taken to death camps like Auschwitz.
Qui est venue arrêter Irène Nemirovsky et son mari.
63 years on, Irene Nemirovsky's unflinching chronicle of a defeated nation has transfixed France. Little could she have imagined, as she wrote alone in the woods, under the shadow of Auschwitz, that one day her voice would again be heard by hundreds of thousands of readers. But she must have hoped.
Pour moi, le plus gros du bonheur était déjà fait.
For me, the greatest joy is knowing that the book is being read. That's the main thing. And for me, it's a mixture of joy and pain that I have to live with. I've done all I could, and it's an extraordinary feeling to have brought my mother back to life. And it shows that the Nazis didn't truly succeed in killing her. That's the greatest joy of all. I hate the word vengeance. It's not vengeance, but it is a victory.
Simplement une victoire.
Caroline Wyatt. Nathan Sharansky, the right-wing Israeli government minister, knows about oppression